welcome. I'm Karima Brown and you're watching CNBC Africa's special broadcast View from the Top. My guest tonight is Advocate Thulisile Madonsela. She's of course the public protector in South Africa. Advocate Madonsela, thank you so much for joining us. Let me start off by asking you, how do we as South Africans and as citizens know and judge whether you are discharging your job as public protector, in the proper constitutional context in which you've been appointed? What is the measurement that we use to evaluate whether you're doing your work successfully?
Good evening, Karima, and good evening to the listeners. Thank you for having me on the show. I believe the best way to judge whether the public protector is doing the right job or not is to look at the Constitution itself and say, what is the office required to do? Is to investigate allegations of impropriety in state affairs, report on that, and to take appropriate remedial action. People know what went on, usually they do, and people know what is the right thing to do because they know what the law says, what the Constitution says, and what the prescripts in government say. If my findings are not consistent with what is in the law and what is in the prescripts, then people can feel that I'm not doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, the Public Protector Act does give you wide powers. How do you decide to investigate an institution or an individual in the absence of somebody coming to you with a complaint?
There's two ways. I can investigate on the basis of a complaint, or if I suspect that there's wrongdoing. The Public Protector Act says that the public protector may investigate on the basis of a complaint or on suspicion of wrongdoing. Normally, we would suspect that there's wrongdoing by reading newspapers or watching your show and other shows, the ones that do third-degree kind of work or exposés. But also, our investigators are community members. They can walk and see potholes and hospitals that are not attended to, police stations that have not yet been used. So it's things like that.
Now, of course, you have been in the media a lot around high-profile cases involving either members of political parties or, in fact, government departments. And, of course, it is important to do that. But I recently interviewed David Lewis from Corruption Watch, and he was saying that a lot of the corruption that is being reported, in fact, comes from very small towns and communities. How do you balance your work in terms of taking on high-profile cases, which you ought to be doing, but also looking at corruption in smaller places, but that actually affects, communities in a very real and direct manner?
At the moment, we prioritize cases from individuals. Even though we have the power to initiate investigations, I rarely do initiated investigations on corruption.
Let me interrupt you there. Why do you really initiate your own investigations? Why do you wait for someone to lodge a complaint?
Because we have too many complaints and very few hands. We have a staff of less than 300 people. And last year alone, we received 20,000 cases and we had carried over 6,000 cases. So we handled about 26,000 cases. So there's a bit of a backlog in terms of what we have. But interestingly, unlike Corruption Watch, we don't get a lot of complaints around what we regard as retail corruption.
Well, what do you mean by retail corruption?
Individualized corruption. We normally get systemic corruption or organized crime, corruption where they say there's a syndicate that was involved in a SASSA grant or a syndicate involved in Home Affairs or tender, a group of people, something that is major and lots of money. The retail corruption is when you bribe a traffic officer or you bribe one person at Home Affairs or at SASSA. We don't get a lot of complaints around that. I think the kinds of complaints we received were around people alleging that there was corruption in licensing, the process of people getting licenses. That was what we got, but we don't get a lot of those. Yes.
You were saying that your caseload is, massive, and of course you don't have the resources. You have been before Parliament's Portfolio Committee lobbying for resources. Take us through what the Public Protector's budget allocation is and what is your staff complement. And as you were saying, it's obviously not enough to do your job.
The staff complement at this stage is around formal members of staff about 279. Then we have a few interns, which brings us to about 300. The budget itself is a little under 200 million. And we have oversight over the entire state of South Africa, which is 3 levels of government: national, provincial, and local, including parastatals and other bodies that exercise public power. At the level of horizontal reach, we deal with all 3 arms of government. With the judiciary, we don't deal with judicial functions or decisions of judges, but when it comes to people unhappy with the administrative actions of courts, like the processing of files and appeals, etc., we get that. So we have more than 2,000 in institutions under our jurisdiction. And the population, we've just been informed, is at about 52 million. Presumably about 20 million people in this country may at any given stage be unhappy with the administrative action taken by the state and want an informal channel such as the Public Protector to resolve that complaint.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the allocation that you get, where is the biggest shortfall? Do you need more investigators? Do you need more advocates? Where's the capacity deficits in your own operation?
It's definitely investigators. We need more investigators. The discussion in Parliament this last time was a little bit helpful in some ways, but in some ways not helpful, in that it didn't center on Section 182(4) of the Constitution that says the Public Protector must be accessible to all persons and communities. There were, during some parts of the discussion, some kind of suggestion that we may be taking more than we should. But when you look at how this office was conceived, it was that Gogo Dlamini or any other ordinary person didn't have to go to a court of law when they had a problem with administrative actions of the state. They had to exhaust internal procedures in that institution, but when they reached a dead end, there was supposed to be an institution called the Public Protector that could resolve these things in a non-judicial way, which means less time, less money, and less complexity.
And in reality, Advocate Madonsela, it obviously isn't working like that. You have admitted that you are in fact, having backlogs. There's been complaints, for example, that you're not moving fast enough in some instances, and that you're cherry picking some of the cases that you're involved in. Take us through an average, decision that your office takes on a matter. How do you decide to go for a particular case or to leave, another? What are the variables that you take into consideration?
Thank you. Just firstly, we don't cherry pick, but it's true that we're not as fast as we should. And the answer we got from the Auditor General that seemed to get a note from Parliament was reduce your targets. Meaning, if people are complaining that we take too long now, we should just legitimize they're taking too long by making our targets. If cases right now are supposed to take 3 months, we should then say, okay, we'll take 1 year. Whereas bread and butter matters should take a short space of time because people are losing their homes sometimes due to bad administrative action. Now, the Constitution or the Public Protector Act gives me discretion to decide what comes in and what do we reject. So the matters outside jurisdiction are matters where there's been a court decision or matters outside the public sectors. Otherwise, everything else is within jurisdiction. In deciding what comes in, we look at whether or not there is an institution in that sector that can give you the same justice and with equal remedies. For example, it's a prisoner's matter. There's the Inspector General of Prisons. If you're complaining about the security sector, there's the Inspector General of Intelligence. If it's the police, if it's police brutality or related matters, we may send it to the IPID. If it's a poor service delivery by the police, we might send it to the civilian secretariat in the police. If you're a public servant, you haven't been dealt with appropriately, it may go to the Public Service Commission. If it's a human rights matter as well as administrative action, we may refer it to the Human Rights Commission, and the same on gender and cultural rights. So it's a question of if there is another available remedy. But we're careful. Parliament was saying we're taking too much. We're careful. We really send you off. Because even the question of exhausting internal remedies, to ask a grandma that until you have personally spoken to the MEC, I will not take your case, is not realistic, because Grandma Dlamini is not going to be able to insist on a meeting with an MEC. So we facilitate that. So really, there's very few cases that we send off. I think the accusation from Parliament is more that we include rather than we exclude, but we're careful. We have a triaging process through an assessment committee that looks through these things and meets with me once a week. They have recommended whether we take it, and if we take it, is it going to be a 3 months matter or a 6 to 12 months matter? Will it be dealt with at national or in the provinces? They make their own recommendation, and then we sit again as a team. I don't sit in a little corner, and then I would say to them, okay, I agree with you on a majority of cases, but on 1 or 2 cases I may say that, okay, this one, let's take it to the Human Rights Commission or some other structure.
Advocate Madonsela, take us through how important the media is. You were saying earlier that often you hear or are alerted to corruption, rather your office, through reports in the media. How central is the media to the constitutional imperative of your office and in executing the responsibility that has been given to you?
The media is very central. It is impossible for an ombudsman-like office to function without the media. A public protector office, as you know, it has non-judicial enforcement powers. So just to be able to make an impact, you need a public dialogue on the issues that we deal with. So the media is extremely important. We always say in modern societies, we're not a village where we can discuss and these matters on a face-to-face basis. So the only way we can dialogue as a nation is through the media. And the only way we can make an impact as an ombudsman institution is through that dialogue. That dialogue allows what we call moral suasion, in that the power of our decisions is not the coercive force of the decision. It's really the loss of face and the conversation that gets people talking, it gets the state to admit what's the right way of doing business and the wrong way of doing business.
But the whole question around your relationship with the media and with the public is, of course, bringing a lot of scrutiny onto your office itself. How do you deal with the question of political pressure?
I don't experience a lot of political pressure, except that in 1 or 2 cases there is often one person, a few politicians that are not happy with the decision, and then usually people won't attack the actual decision, they attack the process, and sometimes, and in fact not sometimes, all of the time wrongfully so, because you hear somebody saying they were not consulted, when in the report it will say to you, this is how the process unfolded, and we would never make an adverse finding against anyone without consulting them. So yes, there are a few people that try to sensationalize or to attack the integrity of the process, but for me and my team, it doesn't faze us. Our approach is always that stick with one script. What happened, what should have happened, is there a discrepancy? If there is one, does it constitute maladministration? I have simplified the narrative for the rest of my team so that there's never confusion around, does this one involve Gogo Dlamini? Does this one involve a high-profile politician? The script is the same.
Advocate Madonsela, we have to take a short break now. We are taking a short break, but when we return, we continue our conversation with South Africa's Public Protector, Advocate Thulisile Madonsela.